In the corporate world, there's a dangerous assumption we're taught to believe that scale equals safety, that legacy equals responsibility, that a company this big could never cut corners. But what happens when power becomes a shield? When warnings are documented, risks are known, and profits still come first? Today's file isn't about one mistake. It's about a system that allowed mistakes to survive. This is the corporate file on Boeing, and how power protected billion-dollar lies. The legacy that bought trust. For decades, Boeing wasn't just a company, it was an institution. Its aircraft carried presidents, militaries, and millions of passengers every single day. Safety wasn't just a feature, it was the brand. Inside aviation, Boeing had something more valuable than patents or factories. It had trust. That trust gave it influence. With airlines, with regulators, with governments. And influence, when left unchecked, changes incentives. By the 2000s, Boeing wasn't just engineering planes. It was engineering perception. The company had become too essential to fail, too embedded in national infrastructure to question. But trust, once absolute, creates blind spots. And those blind spots would prove fatal. The pressure nobody saw. In the early 2000s, Boeing faced a serious threat. A competitor launched a fuel-efficient aircraft that airlines loved. Boeing had two options: design a new plane from scratch or modify an old one and rush it to market. A clean sheet design would take time. Time meant lost orders. Lost orders meant lost stock value. So Boeing chose speed. Internally, engineers raised concerns. Emails documented confusion, frustration, and fear. Some warned that systems were being layered on top of aging designs. But warnings don't show up on earnings calls. The pressure wasn't subtle. Wall Street demanded results. Airlines demanded delivery dates. And inside Boeing's boardrooms, the message was clear: deliver fast or lose the market. What started as competitive urgency became operational recklessness. Deadlines overrode design reviews. Financial projections silenced engineering doubts. And slowly, safety became negotiable. Safety as a checkbox. One system became central to the story: a software feature designed to prevent stalls. On paper, it sounded minor. In reality, it had enormous authority over the aircraft. Here's the issue: pilots weren't fully informed. Training was minimized. Documentation was vague. Why? Because additional training costs airlines money, and selling an aircraft that required no simulator training made it easier to close deals. Safety wasn't ignored, it was reframed. Inside emails later revealed employees joking about regulators, questioning aircraft readiness, and expressing disbelief that the planes were being approved. One message read, "This airplane is designed by clowns who are supervised by monkeys." Another engineer asked, "Would you put your family on this aircraft?" But approvals kept coming, because the system wasn't designed to catch problems. It was designed to process applications. There's a difference. When safety becomes a series of checkboxes rather than a living commitment, the questions change. Instead of, "Is this safe?" the question becomes, "Can we make this compliant?" And compliance, as it turns out, can be engineered. Regulatory capture. A key question emerges here: how did this pass oversight? The answer isn't a single failure, it's a system. Over time, certification responsibilities shifted. Manufacturers were allowed to self-certify parts of their own designs under regulatory supervision. In theory, it increased efficiency. In practice, it blurred accountability. When a regulator depends on the company it oversees for data, expertise, and timelines, power quietly shifts. Oversight becomes collaboration. Collaboration becomes trust. Trust becomes assumption. And assumptions don't save lives. The FAA didn't have the resources to independently verify every system, so it relied on Boeing's own engineers to assess Boeing's own aircraft. The conflict of interest was structural, not personal. Nobody needed to be corrupt. The system itself was compromised by design. Regulatory capture doesn't require conspiracy, it just requires convenience. And in aviation, convenience had become policy. After the unthinkable, then came the crashes. Suddenly, what had been internal became undeniable. Investigations uncovered prior warnings that went unaddressed, safety assessments that underestimated risk, and a corporate culture increasingly driven by financial metrics. Executives issued statements. Apologies were made. But internally, the documents told a colder story. This wasn't about one bad decision, it was about repeated choices, each justified as manageable. Until they weren't. Families demanded answers. Investigators found patterns. Whistleblowers came forward with stories of intimidation, ignored protocols, and production quotas that prioritized speed over precision. One engineer described being told to pencil whip safety reports. Another revealed that concerns about the software system had been raised years before the first crash. The evidence wasn't hidden in some vault. It was in emails, meeting notes, and internal audits. The question wasn't whether Boeing knew. The question was why knowing wasn't enough to stop it. And the answer pointed to something darker. A culture where financial performance had quietly become the ultimate safety metric. How power protects itself. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When a company becomes critical to national infrastructure, defense, and employment, consequences change. Fines replace criminal accountability. Settlements replace trials. Language replaces responsibility. No company collapses, no executive goes to prison. The cost is absorbed quietly by families, by passengers, by public trust. Power doesn't deny failure, it survives it. Boeing paid billions in fines and settlements. But the checks were written by shareholders, not decision-makers. The executives who pushed the timelines, who dismissed the warnings, who chose profit over protocol, most walked away with severance packages and clean records. Meanwhile, the families who lost loved ones received settlements with non-disclosure agreements attached. Silence became part of the transaction, and the regulatory system that failed to catch the problems? It remained essentially unchanged, because the alternative, holding a pillar of American industry truly accountable, would mean admitting that the system itself is broken, that oversight has been outsourced, that we've allowed corporate interest to dictate public safety. That admission would require change, real change, the kind that threatens power. So instead, we get reforms. New procedures, additional training, policy updates, all necessary, none sufficient. Because as long as the incentive structure remains the same, the pattern will repeat. Different company, different product, same logic. Protect the bottom line, manage the fallout, survive the scandal. The file closes, the system remains. This corporate file isn't about hating a company. It's about understanding how systems fail when power concentrates. Boeing didn't start as a villain. It became one by believing its own immunity. And that's the real danger. Because when warnings clash with quarterly profits, the truth doesn't disappear. It just waits. The engineers who raised concerns weren't wrong. They were ignored. The regulators who should have caught the problems weren't incompetent. They were outmatched. And the passengers who trusted the brand, who believed that legacy meant safety, they paid the ultimate price for assumptions we all made. This file closes with a question. What do we do with this knowledge? Do we accept that this is simply how power operates? Inevitable? Untouchable? Too big to truly fail? Or do we demand something different? Systems where warnings stop production lines. Where safety isn't negotiable regardless of stock price. Where accountability reaches the boardroom, not just the balance sheet. Because the next file is already being written. At some company, in some industry, right now. Where pressure is mounting, corners are being considered, and someone is deciding whether to speak up or stay quiet. The Boeing file taught us something critical. Documentation isn't protection. Warnings aren't prevention. And corporate power, when left unchecked, will always choose survival over truth. This was World Corporate Files, and this file is closed for now. When power goes unquestioned, accountability becomes optional. If this investigation revealed something you hadn't considered, subscribe to World Corporate Files. Because the next case is already open, and the documents don't lie.